everybody. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us tonight. This is an official mentor class, and it's fall preparation for winterization. And my name is Stewart Ledford, and because of our current situation, I haven't necessarily met everyone yet. So just a brief introduction. I've been keeping bees since, I think 2013, but I'm not sure. But I love TVBA. I went through the mentorship class with my young daughters, fell in love with it, got actively involved just the very next year in the mentor class. And you can too. And I encourage you to do that because you get a lot more out of it the more you participate. And I have just loved this mentor class all along. Met incredible friends, Ruth Ann, Ken, Nancy, many others. We're all product of the class too, you know, so it's really amazing. Well, tonight is going to be a very content-heavy conversation. I'm going to try to get us out as quickly as possible, but I promise you it's going to go to 8:30 at least, and maybe on towards 9 o'clock. We may take a 5-minute break just to get up, stretch, use the restroom, whatever we need to do. But so here we go. I always ask the question, when do you think preparing for winterization begins? As a beekeeper, when does that start for you? Now, because we're online, it's kind of a rhetorical question. Some people say it starts in the spring, like I'm thinking about next winter, and that's great too. But really, for me, it starts July 1st because there are some activities that I do in July that literally start preparing for that year's winter. If you've not already done so, let's look at our screen together. And these slide decks are not meant for beautiful, colorful presentations. This is an information-packed PowerPoint, and I really appreciate Randy Overton attended one of my first classes, and I verbally put this all out there, and this is essentially his notes, and they're so good we get to reuse them every year. So a big shout out to Randy for preparing this together, and we will definitely share this with you after the class. So if you've not already done so, hopefully everyone, you've already reviewed Beekeeping in Tennessee. It's a free pamphlet out of the UTK system. But they have a section, Overwintering a Honeybee Colony, and it's fundamental, it's great, it's science-based. I'm going to hit on some of the highlights tonight. I'm not going to cover it in detail, okay? And so another thing, if you've learned from your mentors or other friends and beekeepers, I am in no way contradicting anything they're saying. Their techniques are great and work also. Take what you learned tonight and incorporate it to what you're learning from our guest speakers and our mentors and add to it. I never want to get in a debate with someone because normally if someone else is doing something, it works also. And what I'm telling you tonight is basically the way I prepare for winter, and it works pretty well, okay? So let's dive right into it. I always start with the bigger, broader picture. It's real important that we understand the cycles of brood production, and then we want to develop a strategy that works well for us, okay? So I want us to look down here at this graph, and this is really important. So beginning at or around the summer solstice, remember the queens really utilize the amount of sunlight that's available. So the summer solstice is the longest day of the year. It's the most sunlight of the year. And once it starts getting darker, she will start slowing down her brood production. So at the bottom on this graph, the solid line is the brood population, and then the dotted line is adult population. And I don't know about all the zigzags here, but basically the punchline is your queens slowed down. Around the end of June, it varies every year, they start slowing down. Now, you may not see it at first. It may seem like the hive is still crowded, but she is reducing space, okay? And I also want you to see that there's a slow decline, And there is somewhat of a bump there in September, October. And she lays a certain, she lays bees that are gonna make it through the whole winter. And as you've learned in your class, you know, the foraging bees during the summer, they usually live around 45 days. They literally work themselves to death. They work until their wings deteriorate, or if they get caught up in some type of catastrophic event. But basically, how can we get a bee from 45 days to make it 6 months? And when you hear about winter bees, there's cool talks out there. There's cool studies about their fat content and their ability to make it through the winter longer. Okay. And also notice that the brood is at its very lowest at the winter solstice. That is the darkest day of the year. Okay. And then slowly but surely, the queen starts to build back up. Coming back to the first of the year, back over here in January, she does start to build up slowly. And it has a lot to do with daylight and pollen. So when pollen starts coming back in the hive, she starts producing brood. Okay, we'll come back to that in a little bit, but just, I will talk more about this later when you go through your level 2 learning. But basically, in my mind, I think around Valentine's Day in our area, the queens start picking up their volume of brood production. But they will definitely be going really strong. And if you do your bee math, you should know how long it takes for, you know, 16, 20, and 24. So it takes about 20 to 21 days or 3 weeks for the females to hatch. So starting around Valentine's Day, that first brood cycle will start coming out the first or second week of March. Okay. Now, I don't have it graphed on here, but just a quick little side note. As the brood production is decreasing after June, July, the mites are increasing with the heat. So it's really wild that as the bees are decreasing, the mites are increasing. So that's why it's really important that we do our mite treatments, especially before the mite buildup happens June, July, and August. Okay, so in talking with Randy and Ruth Ann over the years, I always ask them, what is the main thing that new beekeepers just need help with? And Ruth told me one time, they don't build up fast enough and we don't downsize quick enough. So it is anticipating what's happening with the bees, and as beekeepers, how we manage their resources. How quickly do we build up in the spring, and then do we downsize correctly at the right time? So I'm going to state some obvious things, and I don't mean to be insulting in any way, but I have to state the obvious here. Many of you have had an incredible spring. You had great hives, you got to split your hives, you caught swarms, all kinds of wonderful things happen, and they built up really strong and robust. That's all changed. That's what happens in the spring, all the way up until we reach summer and potentially a dry period, the dearth. Dearth doesn't always happen. I'll talk about that a little bit here in a minute, but I want you to get written in your mind right now that things have really changed. We are not building up anymore. We are actually downsizing now. So you need to be downsizing appropriately also. So with me just making some assumptions, I would say you have approximately 4 good frames of brood. Now you may have a ton of bees, but they're slowly decreasing in size. So space management is so important. Sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, that hive, I lost it because of wax moths or hive beetles. No, that immediately tells me it's a space management problem. Those things come in when the bees can't maintain or defend their space. There's too much space, okay? And the bees get overwhelmed with it, okay? So if the queen is starting to downsize, we need to start downsizing. okay? I used to say wait later in the year, but I no longer say that because 3 or 4 years ago, I really messed up. There was a serious drought. Do y'all remember that? It was
Oh,
an
yeah.
incredible spring, but then around third or fourth week of April, a drought set in and it devastated. And that was the year of the wildfires here in Chattanooga area, just to remind you of that. I got devastated that year. I had incredible bee stock. I was doing so well, and I didn't downsize quick enough. They saw it coming. They slowed up early. So they were actually smarter, but I just was not in my normal rhythm. I mean, that was oddity. And in hindsight, I would have done things different. But at the time, I didn't know that it was not just a temporary dry spell. So here's what I need you to consider. When you do your inspections now, be looking for the bees clearing out, or they stop utilizing a box, and it's normally the bottom box. Now, they may put pollen in it. They may put an abundance of pollen, but notice how they remove the nectar out. There's no more larvae or any kind of brood production. They are reducing their space. So this is very important. Please pay attention. I want you to do this now. When they clear a box out, I want you to go ahead and take it off. And I will get into the specifics down here. The second last bullet point was something I'm going to hit on, but I'll cover it here in just a minute, okay? So reduce the space based on the resources in the hive, not the date. Very important. So now let's talk about what would be our ideal hive configuration when we go into the winter, okay? When you read Beekeeping in Tennessee, it has some recommendations, but in my experience in listening to some key people over the past few years, like some of our guest speakers, this is where I've landed. If you're running deep equipment, which most of you are, I think the ideal hive, and this would be if you had a really strong hive, eventually you're going to get it down into 2 deeps, or if a deep and a medium full of honey. Okay, so 2 deeps equals 3 mediums, but this would be for an extremely large hive that has a lot of bees. This would be their reduced space. This is as big as I would go into winter. 3 mediums. I used to do 3 mediums and 1 honey super, but I found that even my biggest hives, that was too much space. And so I really like this configuration, but if your mentor says to do something different, that's fine. I'm okay with that. Ruth Ann, do you want to add anything right here?
No, I found that to be correct as well.
Okay. So, real important. When I say manage space, that means move stuff around, take stuff out. We're trying, as we go towards winter, we're trying to create an ideal configuration that has the maximum amount of resources in the design that the bees like. You with me so far? So you want to make sure all of your brood frames are in the right place, your pollen honey is in the right place on the outside, and then in that far outside positions 1 and 8 or 10, depending what size equipment you're running, you want the honey in the outside positions. Now that's ideal. A lot of times with new beekeepers, they're like, my hive is not that healthy. It's not that full. I don't have that much resources. That's fine. You always want to maintain that ideal configuration. Remember, the brood is in the middle. The pollen should be against the brood, and then the honey on the outside. If you only have 6 frames out of an 8-frame hive, put those 6 frames together appropriately. That's okay. All right. So I love the Goldilocks approach. I don't want hives too big. I don't want them too small. I want them just right. And so that normally means when you look down in there, there needs to be about an 80% population of the bees and about 20% space. Now, normally during the spring, I would be cautious of that ratio, because that ratio, anything above that, they start to have pressure and they'll swarm. But normally, unless you got crazy bees, which a lot of us do, they should never swarm in the fall. But I hate to say it, a lot of times they do, and they're dead. People always freak out and say, oh no, I just had a swarm. Does anybody have a queen for sale? No, you're going to have a lot of trouble finding a queen this time of year. I'm going to show you some pictures of my configuration and explain next year what you can do as an insurance policy, okay? This is real important. Look at bullet point number 4 here. Remove all foundation or partially drawn comb. That is not helping the situation. It will affect their ability to heat their cluster. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Just go ahead and remove it, okay? I only want drawn comb in the hive over the winter, even if it means it's kind of a compressed space. Now, some people say, well, could I not feed them and encourage them to draw comb, to pull out more comb? Now, I speak in absolutes. Of course, there may be these random situations where what I'm saying is not totally correct, but in general, they do not pull out comb this time of year. The comb production happens in the spring when you have new bees that are approximately 13 to 16 days old. Their glands are active, and there's a nectar source, so they're able to have plenty of food and they convert it into wax. This time of year, they are not interested in pulling comb. So go ahead and take it out and save it for next year. Okay? Rearrange it, remove those empty drawn combs. Okay? Protect that dome orientation. I've already talked about it. The main thing is you want your food over the cluster. So the top box is all food stores, honey and nectar, okay? And that's why in Tennessee, we recommend 40 to 50 pounds of food. But I'm going to start to say something here. We experience a lot of losses in Tennessee over the winter. And there's kind of a debate of why. I don't think that starvation or lack of food is one of the top killers. I personally have really never lost a hive because they starved to death. It's other more important things. It's mites that are vectors that are putting viruses. The big trend right now is we think that there is so many viruses coming from the mites, your hive basically gets sick and dies. Another big killer is moisture. I'm going to talk about that later. But here's something I've learned, and we're going to talk about it right now. So you need to check your hive right now. We only have a small period of time left that if you're out of honey, you're in trouble, but you have time to recover, but just a little window of time. We still have time to feed, but y'all, it's the middle of August, and we only have August and September for them to take any more food. So if you're light on your stores right now, you absolutely need to feed. And we encourage a different ratio of sugar water than what you're used to. This time of year, you do 2 parts sugar to 1 part water. You have to not high cook it, but slow cook it to get it to dissolve into solution. The reason why is they're able to dehydrate it quicker. They don't have time. We're running out of time. So,
if
yeah,
I could interject one thing there, Stuart,
do.
just for a quick melting of that sugar, boil the water on the stove and then turn the stove off and take it off and pour the sugar in then. You can boil water a lot faster. It takes forever to stir that sugar in the water. So just boil the water and get it done with, and then dump the sugar in.
Awesome. Great suggestion. Now this next one, let's say you have some frames in your lower box that they've now cleared out. You don't see any brood down there at all. You'll still see some bees walking through there, but they've cleared it out. They've taken the stores and they've moved it up. We're going to take that box off. And people say, well, what should I do if there's still some nectar, like just a little bit, not a full comb of honey, but like there's nectar in the corners, or maybe there's some pollen. This is a great time where you put your partial resource frames, you put it out way away from your hives. It triggers a robbing response, so you don't want it anywhere near your hives. I usually put it out of sight. So if my hives are on one side of the house, I'll put it 100 or more feet away from the hives. So that way the bees fly to it, they collect it, whatever resources are left, and they take it back to the hive, and it doesn't feel like they're robbing. Now, I've had debates with people, but I personally have never set off robbing in my hives by putting out wet comb. Now, I do have to put a caveat here. In the Tennessee law, the way it's written, technically that's illegal. You're not supposed to put out any wet honey or sugar source. But Mike Studer, over and over in every class I've been with, says that is like if someone was illegally trying to kill your bees, like if your neighbor put out a trap to poison them, that's illegal. But this is part of beekeeping practice. Use their natural robbing abilities to clean up your equipment. Let me say something else. They normally will not clean out the pollen. And people always ask, well, can I save the pollen for next year? You can, but it goes stale. It gets old. It's not fresh. It is their protein source. I learned this from Lansford. Find you a fire ant hill somewhere around your property and disturb it and put, or just put the frames right on top of it, and overnight the ants will clear that pollen out of your comb. Now, the last item almost got me a divorce a few times. Once you have these empty combs, we're going to talk about storing your combs and how important that is, but you need to put it in a freezer 24 to 48 hours to kill any microscopic pests that might be in there. Any eggs, larvae that are coming from like the hive beetles, any parasites, fungus, anything else, freeze it. It kills all the little critters, and it's part of your preparation. If you don't, you run the risk of those things hatching and possibly destroying your comb. So any questions or comments on this slide before I move forward?
I have a question. This is Mary Aho.
Hello, Mary.
Hey, how are you doing? And thank you for doing this. So you're saying that there are cases, because these are all, as you know, these are all new hives. And so there are cases where you can have survival with one box, can't you? Because
oh yeah,
I have one. Okay, good.
Yeah, so great question.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you continue. You were going to say something else.
Well, no, please tell me that first, because the other one's on a different subject, but what you talked about.
Go ahead and ask your next question, and I'm going to try to share some screens.
Okay. So my next question is, you're emphasizing that we need to feed if we see there's not enough reserve. However, Varroa treatment, if you're using something, say, Apiguard,
yep.
all of the material I have read says that you cannot feed and treat at the same time. So what do you do?
Right. So have you done any treatments yet? Or are you planning on doing?
I'm in the middle of, I am in the middle of the treatment. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So one thing about sugar water, and Ruth Ann, help me out here. So here's a balance, everybody. I used to super feed my hives. I fed this time of year no matter what. I didn't care if I was not going to let my bees starve. Well, I just told you they don't starve. I've not had mine starve. If they're going to starve, it happens later in the spring, February and March. March is the most dangerous time of year for our bees. because they need the resources, they use it up really quickly, and the pollen may not be there yet, or we may have a cold snap. The starvation happens in March. However, I have overfed my hives, and this is why I'm leery of it. There's nothing worse than having 3 hives chock full of sugar water honey and all 3 of them die. And then you've got frames and frames and frames. You've got 24 plus frames of sugar water honey. Nobody wants that. It's hard. So there's a balance here, and I'm trying to express that balance. However, being dry right now, they're going to die. So find that Goldilocks. It's somewhere in the middle. So if they have a little bit of honey, now's a great time to feed, but do not wait any longer. We're out of time. So has everyone noticed our goldenrod's out?
Yeah.
Now, there's good news and bad news here. This used to be my primary field that my bees would go to, and I would go stand in this, and it was just teeming with pollinators. A few years ago, they brought the bulldozers in, closed it, and put up spec houses. So that's just an indication of when we talk about 4 Ps, you know, pests, pesticides, pathogen, and poor food quality. That's what it means, is we're losing our natural resources. However, you should be seeing goldenrod. Now, some years, and it's not happened ever since I've been a beekeeper, they used to have great fall flows. There would be enough asters and other fall flowers, including goldenrod, which could produce enough nectar and pollen. Some people do sunflower seeds, sunflowers, but I have never got a strong enough fall flow to build up my hives enough with the resources. Now, they'll pack in some pollen, definitely. And I know you've heard this many times, but you are going to start smelling your hives, okay? And you're going to freak out. You're going to think, oh my gosh, I smell something really strong. It's American foul brood. I mean, that's immediately what every newcomer thinks. No one's exempt from that. I think it every year. But it's a nasty little smell that I've just come to love. It's intoxicating for me. It smells like dirty socks, kind of, with a pollen flavor to it. I have not smelled it in my hives yet, but I'm telling you, one year I could smell it 50, 75, 100 feet away from my hives. When I'd be mowing grass, I would smell it. It was so powerful. So just be on the lookout, get in touch with that, but it's goldenrod coming in. But we're not going to have a strong enough flow to produce enough nectar to catch you up, okay? So this is my ideal configuration going into a winter, even though these are not designed. This is actually a spring picture here, so don't let me confuse you with my words. But in my perfect yard, going into winter, I would love to have 6 full hives and then 6 nooks on each side, 1 for each hive. Now, that is the maximum insurance policy. If I could go through the winter, if I lost 50% of my hives, I don't care if it's a nook or a main hive, when I come out in the spring, I have a very strong beginning.
Explain what you mean by insurance, like you can use that queen to requeen.
Yeah, so let's say I went into the winter with this look here. You know, I love overwintering in nooks. They do, I think, for me, I'm having a better success with nooks than the big hives. But let's say this big hive dies right here during the winter, then I would take this nook and it would be its replacement. And next spring, and you'll learn this in your class to prepare you for next year, you can take a nook and build it up very quickly into a strong, productive hive incredibly fast. This is more of a realistic kind of look that I would have going into the winter. You know, 4 or 5 hives, 3 or 4 nooks. That's kind of more realistic for me.
And if you get close to the fall and you find that you have lost a queen, you've got queens on the side there that you could combine a hive and get you through.
Yes. So you've got to attend my second year class. We've not scheduled it yet. It's probably going to be December 12th. We haven't talked about it, but that's when there's no SEC football games on. I don't know how I'm going to do it over the video. We're going to have to figure that all out. But look at my screen right now. This is my perfect springtime configuration. This is as high as I go with my hives. I have 3 mediums on the bottom. That equals 2 deeps. And I put 3 medium honey supers on top. That's as high as I want to go. That's as heavy as I want to go. If I go any higher, I'm going to have to use a ladder. So this is a really beautiful setup here, but it's in the spring, okay? But you can see I do spring splits also. You'll learn about that in the class. I also do what I call July 1st splits. Those splits are the insurance policy that are going to make it all the way through the winter. You will learn about that in a future class. So I like to do July 1st splits, and those nooks are going to go all the way through the winter with a new queen. And when she comes out next year, it's going to be her first spring, and she's going to do amazing. She's going to go super fast. So back to the lady that asked the question about, can you do it in one box? So your first year, you've got to deal with what you've got. Okay, you've got to solve your issues with the variables that you have at hand. So let me just say, Mary, was that your name, Mary?
Yes.
Just quickly, how many hives do you have?
I have 4.
Okay, and in general, how many boxes are on each one of them?
I have 2 double with each has a deep and a medium, and then 2 just single deeps.
Okay, I'm fine with that. That single deep equals one of these are mediums here, so that nook equals 1 deep.
Okay.
But what you've got to make sure is, get the food up against the brood, because they're normally in the winter, they like to work up. So that's one of the dangers of only having a single layer. There's not a lot of food on top, but I'm going to teach you how to dry feed here in a minute as well. Okay. You with me so far? But they can make it in a single deep. It is possible.
Either that or just move them to a nuke with a double nuke.
Yeah, I like double nooks. Great point. That's actually my preference. If I had that situation, to answer your question, if I had the equipment, if I had a deep or I had a double nook, I would rather put them in the nook and feed them and get that food on top of them. And it increases their chance of survival, in my opinion.
That sounds good.
Okay. So now let's talk about the comb that you've taken off. Let's say your bottom box is all full of drone comb. That is a wonderful thing. That is really the hardest asset to get out of your hives, is good drawn comb that's reusable next year. So it's very valuable. You definitely want to protect it. You want to save it. It's going to come in very handy next year. It's going to help you build up so quickly next year. So don't lose it. Don't lose it to wax moths, and they will get it. You cannot escape them. They are all around your place. They're going to get in your house. You can't hide from them. They're going to find it for sure. If a frame gets, so I always bring, this is where I miss seeing y'all in person, because normally I'd bring a frame that's just totally tore up with wax moth webbing. They put webs in it and it just destroys it. I'd say, man, just throw this one away. Where I have one that's partially destroyed, and you can make a call of, can I use this or not? A lot of times I'll take my pocket knife and just cut out the damaged area, and the bees will repair it. And it's really cool. They usually will repair it and pull larger drone comb wherever you cut it out. So you're going to have to make a decision. I usually have 2 frames, and I can say I'd throw this one away and I'd keep this one. Okay. This is 3 ways to prevent it. The best thing to do is buy you a new freezer. Oh, and that's what I was joking about earlier. My wife and I, boy, she hated me using her freezer space. That was not good. I went out and bought my own. So did Randy. Randy got one too. Deep freezes, the top deep freeze, those work really well. It's hard to buy enough freezers if you have a lot of equipment, but I cycle through, remember, 24 to 48 hours. You at least want to freeze those frames, and a lot of times I'll keep cycling it through and keep killing anything that's in it. Freezing is very awesome. This is the ideal situation if you have the space. Wax moths do not like light or ventilation. They like dark, stale places. So I'll tell you, I've learned from people throughout the state of Tennessee, one of the best things to do is if you have an open barn, or like a barn with a cover where you put your tractors or equipment up under it, but it's outside, but it's covered from the rain, you can put up maybe like some conduit or steel, or hang something the correct distance and just hang up your frames in the open air. They do very well spaced out, you know, and just hanging up in the open air. And I know quite a few people that have a lot of success with that. I personally don't have a barn, but if I did, that's what I would do. I have windows in my garage. I actually will take my box, and instead of putting it in its normal position, I lean it up vertically and let the light shine through it from the window. So I put a lot of my equipment up around the windows if I don't have a lot. And I do store it in the supers, but once the wax moth gets going in there, they start tearing it up pretty quickly. So I check on it every 2 weeks or so during the winter just to see how it's going. So there's a chemical option too, and it's like moth crystals, but it's not the mothballs that you put in grandma's cedar chest. Okay, those are dangerous. See that first bullet point? And I'm not going to try to pronounce these names. I'll let one of you chemists do that for me. Don't use regular mothballs. You have to buy the special kind, this PDM. Okay. Man Lake sells it. So does Derek Forster. I've used it for 4 years now, and I really like it. I've not killed any bees. I haven't seen any problems. So I stack up, and then I'll put like a paper plate on the top, and it trickles it. The vapors trickle down through. It has a heart, you know, it's heavier than air, so it sinks. And I will keep them under this Paramoth, that's the name of the brand. And I stop using it in the spring, and I let it aerate out, and I set my boxes out in the sun a day or two before I put them on and make sure the smell's not in there. I've had a lot of success with that. So you're not exempt from this. I'm telling you, they're going to get you. So you have to have a solution. They're going to get it. There's no way to avoid it. Ruth Ann, do you want to add anything here?
The only thing, when you put your comb in the trash bag to put in the freezer, when you take it out of the trash bag, just in case there is any creepy crawlies left, because they will take over in that dark space really quick.
So Mary, here's some other solutions to your situation, okay? Combining hives or further downsizing, okay? There are times where we have to combine hives. Someone give me feedback. Have y'all learned how to do a newspaper combine? So let's say you just have 2 hives. That's it, 2 hives. And you think you're doing really well right now, but all of a sudden, one of them swarms or a queen dies or something happens. And I'm telling y'all, it happens. Unfortunately, not a lot, but occasionally it does. Or what if you have a weak hive and a really strong hive? Now, there are dangers. Mike Stewart would say, man, be careful. Why would you take a weak hive and put it in your good one? I mean, what if it's sick or something? You need to be very careful doing that. There were some people in our group that they preferred going into winter with large hives. So they would not overwinter a small one. They would always combine it into a larger one. But I don't agree with that philosophy. I just told you, I love overwintering in nooks. So the priority is, I like, if I've got a small hive, get it into a smaller nook configuration with food on top. But if I lost a queen and I don't have time, see, the drones aren't around, so it's not like you can necessarily create queens and get them mated in time. Now, don't get me wrong. It depends. If you've got good drone stock, theoretically, and my mentor would breed occasionally in September and made good money if he could get the queens bred. It's really hard to do, though. Okay, but this would be a great solution. So this is how you combine two hives together. It's called a newspaper combine, and normally I would demonstrate in class, but you just take a single sheet of newspaper, and all that's going to do is create a temporary barrier so that the two hives can slowly merge together and start sharing their pheromones and become one. Theoretically, if you took two hives and put them together, they may fight. That's debatable. It depends on the time of year. I will do what I call a hot combine. I've been known to take frames with bees on it, put it in another hive, and they seem to do okay. It's dangerous sometimes, though. So this is the safer way of doing it. I would demonstrate this in class. I don't know how I'm going to do it right now on the phone, but basically read this instructions. You basically want to decide which queen you want to keep, and you got to either get rid or kill the other one. I know. Is that not tragic? I hate saying that. I hate killing queens, but sometimes you got to find the queen that's not doing well and just pull her little head off. Yeah, it's terrible. But I rarely kill queens. Usually I've already lost her some other way. And if you don't do this, the two queens are going to fight it out. So there can be only one queen in the end. So remove the top from the one hive. And I want you to have some sugar water with some drops of vanilla extract. Okay, vanilla. It's an odor, it's a scent. It confuses them. It delays them. They clean themselves up. And I didn't put it on here. What I actually like to do is my bottom hive, my strong hive that I'm going to keep, I will spritz the top box, just the top of the frames, to lay this layer of sugar water and vanilla smell on top of it. Then I put my newspaper, and I just lightly mist it, just lightly. And then I'm about to put the second hive on top of it. Usually just one box. It's weaker, it's smaller. I will turn it upside down and spritz the bottom of its frames to create a vapor barrier there. And I put that on the newspaper. So the philosophy is, it takes them a little bit of time to choose through the newspaper. They do it pretty quickly, actually. Then they start licking and cleaning up each other, and they cleaning up that sugar water and vanilla, and then they start passing around the current queen's pheromone, the QMF, and then they start merging together as one hive. I've had a lot of success with newspaper combines. I've never lost one. Okay? And then I've already said it multiple times, I would prefer to put a smaller hive in a double nook and get them fed up. Now remember, y'all, don't be scared to move resources around. Let's say you got a big hive over here with a lot of honey on it, more than they need. It's okay to take 2 or 3 frames and put it over there in the nook that needs some help. You can cross-share resources. You don't have to keep it in one hive. Let's say this hive's got too much pollen. They did too well of a job, you know? But this one didn't. Take 2 frames of the pollen and put it over in this other one. Feel free to move things around. That's when you start to be a really good beekeeper. When you use all of your variables to solve all of your issues. Let's take a bathroom break. We'll start back at 8 o'clock. Okay, everyone, welcome back. There was some confusion. And if I did confuse you, try to ask a question that I can help clarify. Nancy brings up a good point. I missed something really important. Hopefully you're seeing a picture of some hives here, okay? Let me step back and tell you what happened to get me to this point in time right now, second week of August. During most of the year, the hive is always in 3 mediums or 2 deeps. That's usually where the nest is and where the queen can maintain her laying. So when I look at a hive and I see 4 boxes, I normally almost always assume the bottom 3 have brood in it, and the 4th one is the beginning of the honey supers, okay? When I take my honey off, when I harvest my honey, which is normally sometime after the 2nd week of June all the way, I actually haven't harvested honey yet this year. I still have it sitting on my boxes. I'm going to probably do it this weekend. But when I harvest it, I always leave 1 box of nectar / uncapped honey. I don't rob them completely of everything. I usually just take the capped honey and I leave the uncapped nectar and things. So look at this 4-box configuration. That's what it would look like, let's say in June or July, once I've harvested my honey and they go through the dearth. Then this time of year is when I say they start cleaning out the bottom brood box, okay? And this time of year, if it's cleaned out, I will pull it off and I'll let them rob out the frames, go through the freezing, and I store it. So what does that leave me for the winter? It leaves me 2 boxes of the brood nest, and they should be really pretty decent with resources and some brood in there, okay? And then the top box should be full of nectar honey. If not, that's what I'm feeding. And Mary was concerned, well, she was asking about the chemical treatments. I don't like putting sugar water into my supers, but the good news is they will clean that out next spring as well. And if they don't, I'll set it out and let them clean it up another way. So let me clarify, going into the winter, you want 2 boxes, those are mediums of brood, and 1 box of honey. Since y'all are running deeps, you can either run 1 deep full of brood and pollen and honey on the outside and 1 medium of honey. That's a wonderful configuration. Trevor, our friend who comes and speaks, that's how he likes to overwinter. That's an awesome configuration. 1 deep of brood, 1 medium of honey. Or if you have 2 deeps, the top part of the 2nd deep should be pretty full of honey. It doesn't have to be a full deep of honey, but the top half of the top box should be honey. Because remember, they move up during the winter.
There was a question about, would you feed honeybee healthy? I guess to entice bees to take feed.
Yes. So that is a wonderful question. Normally, in the spring when you're building up, or if you're doing some of that early feed where you don't want them to die in March from starvation, I would include Honeybee Healthy. It also helps with their, Honeybee Healthy is a wonderful thing. It helps them with their digestive tract. It helps their little tummies out, especially in the spring when they're kind of constipated and having trouble. But this time of year, it's dangerous. Why is that? Could someone? Robbing. Did y'all notice 2 to 3 weeks ago, it's not totally dry out there, but did you notice how we hit a dry spell 3 weeks ago? When you walked out in your yard and your grass was dry and crunchy? That usually happens in July. Y'all, we've been 3 to 4 weeks late this whole year. It's been really weird. It's another weird weather cycle. Normally it's super dry in July and August. It's not necessarily that way, but it got that way. And when you see it that dry, the clover's dried up, and you really have to have your entrance reducers on so that they can defend themselves. And this is the time of year when they rob. Okay, let me show you Look at this picture right here. This was an incredible nook. It was so good. It was going to do so great, and it got robbed out like crazy. That's the bottom board. And that was like a scene out of Game of Thrones. This was like the Battle of the Bastards. This is where they all just piled up. And see how they even pulled out the pupa. See the white pupa around? And this all happened in one day. This wasn't like a chemical kill out or a varroa. When you see something like this, this is death. You know, they just fought it out to the bitter end. So I don't like robbing at all. I can't find her now, but the day of, I actually found the queen down in this, and she was still alive, barely, but she was still moving around. So, let me come back to the Honeybee Healthy because I am going to tell you when to use it. I would not put it in my feed right now because it will set off robbing. That's the short answer of it all. Careful this time of year. Okay.
A couple more questions if you want to hit them right quick.
Yeah.
Is it acceptable to keep unused frames in the freezer all winter? Yes, if you've got the space, go for it. You can feed them back in the spring when the hives start running out of food.
And if you have extra frames of honey, you can freeze that also. You definitely want to wrap that in a bag because it will get gooey. But in the spring, don't put a frozen brick into your hive. Right. Let it sit out for a few days. But y'all, if you have extra, I'm going to talk about how to handle a dead out, and you may have some extra frames of honey. Freezing it's the best thing to do, and you can absolutely use it in March and save the day. Comes in handy. Next question.
And if a hive is good on honey but shy on pollen, should you feed pollen?
Great question. Let me come to that in just a minute because I'm going to talk about pollen. Let's talk about what to do as we approach winter. You really need to pay attention here. This is really important. Okay. So you're starting to notice, look, it's 8 o'clock. It's starting to get dark now. The earth is tilting. We're losing daylight. You want to do one last inspection sometime in October. You have to watch the calendar, okay? There will be these periods of where it starts to get cold, but then there's still a few more warm days. I'm talking about that last little warm day that comes second, third week of October. You know when the yellow jackets are starting to die out and they get mean, that time period where you get stung by yellow jackets a lot because they're ornery? That's what I'm talking about. Kind of when the leaves start to change colors a little bit. Look at the weather calendar and pick a day where it's warmer than 70 degrees. This is your last inspection. Okay? So this is the configuration I want you to do. Only then, because remember I've told you robbing is a capability for the next few months, but not this last time. On your last inspection, I want you to take your top inner cover and turn it to where the hole is open. Remember, vapor kills, okay? Water vapor kills. So basically, if you look at my hands, in the winter, the bees do not hibernate. People always ask that. They don't sleep or anything like that. They cluster together very tightly. And together, they share each other's heat. And they're not trying to heat up the entire hive. It's not like your house. It's not like where you're trying to air condition or to heat your entire environment. All they're trying to do is to keep their cluster at 92 to 94 degrees. See down here at the bottom section? And what they do is their wings move on a joint. And just like you can take your shoulders and you can move your shoulder without moving your arm, that's what they do. They don't move their wings, but they wiggle their joint and they generate heat by vibrating their body with that motion. And what they do is they just cluster together, and the outside bees, when they get cold, they just kind of burrow into the middle and they just take turns and rotate. And they will maintain that temperature through the whole winter. Okay? Imagine though, if it's freezing outside and you've got a ball of 92 degrees, it creates condensation. That condensation and heat rises up in the hive. It's a great example how the top part of the hive may be literally freezing cold. It may be below 32 degrees, and here's this warm air, warm, moist air hitting it. It condensates and it will drip water right down on the cluster. That is very dangerous. So what we're about to talk about is one way to avoid that. So that's why it's really important to leave your top entrance open so that that heat rises and then it can flow out of the hive and dissipate. Okay? Also, second bullet point, very important here. I like to take my feeding shim, I have the same kind that you do, and I put it on top of my entrance cover, and it creates like an attic space. So instead of the heat getting stuck on the inner cover, it can go through that center hole, and it goes up into the attic space. And if there's condensation, it will happen up in there.
They don't actually have a feeding shim, Stewart. The supplier where we got our equipment from did not offer a shim, but they have a medium box. Of course, that's quite a bit more space.
That's okay, though. That's good.
They could use that for attic.
Yeah. So if you have an extra box, put it on top of your inner cover and let it be attic. I'm okay with that. All right. So people ask me, there's teachers out there like Michael Bush who live up north where it snows, and they've got to prepare their hives to be under 4 to 6 foot of snow, and they do top entrances and they insulate. He uses insulation. We don't have to do any of that here in the state of Tennessee. So I'm telling you, do not wrap your hives. Don't wrap them with plastic. That adds to the condensation problem. Okay, I don't even want you putting your Cortex board under. Now this is debatable because people say, well, y'all they don't have screen bottom boards either, do they?
Yeah, they do.
They do?
They do.
Okay, I normally leave my hive open because remember the cluster can maintain its own temperature. The only time I may ever slide my board in there is if it gets really super cold, like down around 0. I will put my board in, but look at my comment. I will leave 3 or 4 inches at the front so that it creates kind of like a flume so that the heat continues to rise and clear out of the box. You want airflow. You don't want to shut the airflow off because that will lead to condensation, and it will kill them immediately, y'all. It happens so quickly. So it's real important that they have the airflow and there's a way for the heat to get out. Now, in this last inspection, this is very important. Take out all the paraphernalia. Whatever you've put in that hive, beetle traps, special devices, all kinds of clever things. Take all of that stuff out. You don't want, especially queen excluders, because what if the cluster moves up and the queen can't go with them? You just killed your queen. So take all the paraphernalia out, and remember, configure your hive to be optimum. Look at the last bullet point. Some people like to stack hives on top of each other, or if you have a special type of screened board or screened shim, some people make that themselves. You can have one hive on the bottom, do a screen shim, and then put another hive on top of it, and the heat from the bottom will heat the one on top. You don't have to do it. It's just cute and clever. People like to play around, have fun, and experiment. Sometimes people will just stack 2 hives on top of each other. Okay, now let's talk about winter feeding. This is a little bit different than what we just discussed with right now, fall feeding, which is critical if you're light. Okay, I've already told you, do 2 to 1 feeding right now if you need to. But look, they're going to stop taking this sugar water at some point. They will not continue to take it, and it is not a good solution for the winter.
When the night temps start dropping in the 50s, they'll quit taking liquid feed.
Yep. So because of that, oh yeah, that's the second bullet point.
Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that was good. Some people say that feeding them sugar water stimulates the queen to lay. I do not agree with this premise. I've never seen that happen. I believe the queen changes her laying pattern based off of daylight and the amount of pollen that's coming in the hive. Okay, so I don't think that feeding them liquid is going to stimulate laying. I don't agree with this philosophy. Okay, but let's look at this solid food substitute. Now look, there's so many different ways, y'all. You can watch all kinds of YouTube videos. I definitely suggest you stay away from cooking a fondant, like making your own sugar candy, unless you're just some supreme candy baker and you're really good at it. The problem is if you get sucrose over a certain temperature, it turns into a toxin for the bees. So I do not like heating any or cooking sugar or any of that kind of stuff. I don't like that at all. Okay. I'm going to teach you a method called mountain camp feeding. And there's going to be a hyperlink down here. I actually have the website pulled up. I'll show you some websites here in a minute. That'll be one of them. That's the simple. Let me talk about the simplest way I like to feed. This is the way I do it. People have argued with me, and then I've heard other great beekeepers say this is exactly how they do it, including Ken Williams and Trevor. You know, so this is what Ken does for sure, and I do too. It's real simple. I told you about putting your inner cover, and then let's say you put your medium box in there and it's just empty. I like to pour dry sugar, just dry cane sugar. I pour some in the front and I pour some in the back. That's called the mountain cap method. Now, they cannot raise brood with sugar. They have to have honey and pollen to raise brood. But if they were starving, this is a carbohydrate source that would give them some food. So there's two reasons why I really love this technique. Number one, when that condensation goes up into the attic space, that sugar absorbs it. There's a fancy word for that. I can't remember what it was. You remember Steve Sweeney used to say it. It's the process of absorbing moisture, but I love it. That dry sugar will get hard packed by absorbing all of the liquid. I love that. Now, some people have looked online and they're like, well, what if I pack it with sawdust or wood chips? Or I don't like any of that stuff. Think about it. Do wood chips really absorb moisture? Really? Not much. Some people put cotton, burlap, other things. I don't care about any of that stuff. The sugar absorbs better than all of those things combined. So think about the sugar you leave out on your countertop and it gets hard as a brick. This is exactly what happens here. The second reason I really like it is I have no factual scientific proof here, but I think it keeps the bees' mentality positive. I think they feel good that on a somewhat warm day, they can go up there and feed a little bit. They don't eat a lot of it, but it just keeps them feeling like everything's okay, and that psychologically, I just think it's good. Of course, people want to argue like insects don't have psychology, but I think they do. I think I've seen depressed hives go down because of multiple factors, okay? But what I really, really like to do, so the person that asked the question about the pollen, I don't want you feeding raw pollen because I don't want them producing brood. The cluster will stay, so the queen is going to lay, she will always have a few eggs going, but remember, her lowest period is on the winter solstice there around Christmas time. And she normally has a little patch of brood the size of a baseball. And the cluster surrounds that, okay? And they will protect that very well. And the queen is in there also. We don't want her producing more brood, so I don't like giving a straight pollen source. However, I really love this combination here. This is my preference. Go get, let's see, do I have the name on here? Why do I not have the name on here? Oh, Ultra Bee Pollen. That's the one I love. It comes in a canister. You could also buy patties. I prefer the canister. It's a pollen substitute. I've also included here a scientific comparison of all the different pollen substitutes and Ultra B1, and I love it. So I'll just take 3 parts of that dry pollen and 7 parts of sugar. So I don't care what that means. If that's a tablespoon, okay, 3 tablespoons and 7 tablespoons of salt, sugar. Or if you've got a lot of hives and you're making a big batch, maybe it's 3 cups of pollen, 3 cups of sugar. I mix this together and I just add a little bit of moisture to it. I'm not trying to make a wet dough. I'm trying to just make a somewhat dry dough. And the bees absolutely love this, okay? And to the person that asked about the Honeybee Healthy, this is when I would add Honeybee Healthy to this mixture, okay? If you don't buy that product, you can make it yourself. I've never used it. I love it. I don't want to spend the money. I just take a spritzer, or I mix up water, apple cider vinegar, and lemongrass essential oil. And basically, that's the same as Honeybee Healthy. If you do that right now, though, that will trigger robbing. That is definitely an attractant. Also, down here on my mountain camp, one last thing I may do is I may prepare a spritz bottle with that same apple cider vinegar lemongrass oil concoction. And once I put my dry sugar down, I may mist it just to get it to stick in place. And it also becomes an attractant to get the bees up there tasting it, and it educates them that it's up there. Personally, I love to do this dry pollen sugar combo. Now, I personally like to put this on top of my inner cover, but when you hear most people speak, they put it directly on top of the brood. I don't, but they will. So they'll take a piece of wax paper, not the whole box, but just a good piece that will, give you enough to lay this dry feed out. And they will put it right on top of where the cluster is going to be. And they put that dry food right on top of the frames. It's a better solution. I just don't like, it's messy, and I don't like the cleanup of it all. And if they chew through the paper, it falls down into the hive. I just try to keep it simple for my cleanup next spring. I just put it up on my inner cover. Both works okay. Now, if you were desperate and you had to feed them, putting it on top of the frames gives them a better chance of getting it on a cold day. Because remember, they can't move when it's below 55 degrees. So if it's freezing, your bees are not moving around. They can't go get the food. Any questions or comments here on the dry food strategy?
On the consistency for those patties, it's kind of like sandcastle patties. If you were packing sand together, you want it wet enough to hold, but not wet enough to drip through your fingers.
Look at that thermal picture. Blue doesn't mean cold. Blue is super hot. Look at that cluster. You see it? So the bees are right there, and then up here is really cold. Okay, I'm going to show you a few more pictures now that I can. This is kind of a different setting. See, the white is the hottest part, and then these are favoring the western side, and this is something that you need to keep in mind. Assuming that you've put your bees on the north side of your property facing south, this is when it's really going to matter. They start to orient to the west. So if you're going to stack your food on a side, I prefer to put the best food on the west side, because over time they're going to drift that way and they're going to work their way up. So if you don't have a lot of great resources, put your best resources on your west side. Let me show you another picture. Oh, we're on a roll now. I got this. Here we go. Look at these. See, it shows that not all hives are the same. Look how this is somewhat of a weak. That one, look at that one right there. You can see the cluster down at the bottom, and this is a massive hive. I mean, that thing is just cooking. Pretty cool. Okay, here's some of the websites. these are the ones that are in the lesson. So, you know, here's some questions about mountain camp dry feeding, just the granulated sugar. Y'all, it's easy. It works. Also, here is the study on the different pollen substitutes. Here's the Ultra B brand. I used to do patties, but patties are dangerous in the spring because if you put that in the spring, the hive beetles love pollen and they will lay their eggs and it becomes a mess. And let me draw a very important point. I really encourage you to get the pollen now. Keep it in your freezer. It will stay fresh. And this is your emergency backup for February and March of next year. So go ahead and get it now. Put it in your winter dry feed and freeze it. Save it for your emergency March pollen substitute. And y'all, there have been times to where the pollen will be, the dandelions will come out, the queen will get going, and then we will get an epic Arctic vortex or a snow or a 10-day cold snap, and it'll knock the pollen sources back for 2 weeks. That'll kill your entire hive. So it's great to have this Ultra B on hand, and your hive would survive if you had the pollen substitute available. Let me go ahead and show you just a few more things I'll get to later just so you can visually see it. I'm going to make a reference to a hanging scale that if you want to be scientific and weigh your hives as you go through the winter, I really love, just for $30, this is a 100-pound hanging. I demonstrate it in class, but you can basically tilt the back of your hive with this hook and it will give you an accurate tilt reading of your hive weight, and I will document that. And throughout the winter, you should see the weight slowly going down because over a period of time, they're slowly eating their feed. Okay? And then I think I've got one other website here. There's going to be a reference of using grease patties with essential oils, trachea mite, and this is just a recipe for using a wintergreen grease patty. I'll come back to that in a little bit. I just wanted to show you the websites while I had it pulled up.
Mike Studer says we have a resurgence of tracheal mites in this area for a long time. I guess we didn't, but he says they're back with a vengeance.
What I'm about to tell you is very controversial, but I've had success with it. We want a cold winter. We want the days to stay below 55 degrees. The cold is not going to kill your bees. In fact, you don't want them moving around. The worst thing that could happen is a warm winter. If you see your bees out flying during the winter because it's a 70-degree day, we're in trouble, y'all, because they're out, there's nothing to forage, they're out burning energy, and they're quickly depleting their food. It's dangerous. So pay attention. There have been some winters that were very warm. I always talk about, there was a New Year's Day, and it's late at night. This is the worst time of day for me, but I can't remember how warm it got. I think it got up to like 80-something degrees. Do y'all remember that on a New Year's Day?
That's right. That's right.
That is terrible. So if I see a long period of warmness coming in the winter and they're running light, I'm worried that they're getting at the end of their food, I will do what's called open feeding. This is very controversial. Some people think this is a terrible idea. You're used to top feeding with your jars. This would be where you set up a jug or something away from your hives and they all go there together, and it creates a frenzy, but they can quickly get nectar and take it back to their hive. I like it because it gives them something to collect when nothing's available, and I have saved a lot of hives before by open feeding during these dry periods. There is a video on here on how to make a bucket. I'm not going to talk too much more about this, but this is an emergency situation. Look, if it's just warm 1 or 2 days, that's not a big deal. I'm talking about what if we have a warm December? It happens. Okay. You want to monitor your hive, but after you do that last October inspection, do not get back in your hive. Do not open it. Don't inspect it. Don't do any of that. Now, on a somewhat warm day, if they're flying, you can take the lid off and look down in there. But what I don't want you to do is to move frames around. They have secured everything with propolis, and you do not want to break up the cluster in any way. So I have never cracked open my hives in the winter. Now, I love to open the top box and look down in there and use a flashlight. And I also look at my screen right now. I stick my ear on the side of the hive and I knock on the other side, and you can hear them go. They'll like buzz up, and I know they're still alive. But what happens if you go out there and you knock and you don't hear anything, and you look down and you don't see any movement? You probably have a dead out, and you need to process that up and go ahead and clean it up, okay? We'll talk about that in a minute. But I do want you to monitor it. Just don't inspect it, okay? Weigh the hives, tip it. A lot of times I'll just get a feel by tipping the back, just like, how much does that feel in my hand? Oh, it's getting lighter. Oh, that's really light. Don't tip it too far because stuff will fall over. This isn't an exact thing, but it's definitely a way that you can gauge it. And I showed you the hanging scales that are only $30. I love them, and I use them for other things. You can get the 50-pound or the 100-pound. All of that works really well. Now, some people get really expensive ways to get exact measurements. Hey, if you're a scientist, you like that, go for it, especially if you're running experiments with things. Hive placement. This is real important, y'all. This is when the sun matters, man. If you've not put your hives in an appropriate place, remember, the sun is at its apex on the summer solstice, and it's directly high noon. It's right over our heads. But in the winter, it's very low in the southwest sky. The sun comes up and it doesn't get very high and it goes really low. And having that warmth on the hive really helps out a lot. And I've already told you they'll congregate towards the west side. If you don't have a wind break, so I know that almost all of our weather comes from the southwest. You know, it comes from Birmingham, Huntsville. That's where we get our storms. But I'm telling you, the storms that really get us on the hives are those northern storms, that those polar vortexes that crash down on us with sub-zero weather. Those are brutal. So it's good to have a windbreak on the back of your hives, but be careful. Ruth Ann's probably told you a story. She stacked hay and it blew over and knocked one of her hives over or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I do use cargo straps or ropes or to hold my hives down because the wind will knock them over. So that's really important. And then I told you about grease patties for Varroa. And last time Studer was in town, he mentioned that too. I kind of like that. I've done it. I haven't done it this year, but I have done it in the past, and I like it a lot. So look at that website. Now, last thing, this is real important. Ruth Ann wanted me to emphasize this. You need to start thinking about next year. Now, you're going to go through another class that teaches you how do you come out of winter and get ready to build up very quickly in the spring. But you need to be thinking about how you're going to manage your apiary. How big do you want to get? Are you going to buy bees? Or are you going to use, you've got to come up with a swarm solution. So we're going to teach you, you've already learned how to do splits out into your nooks. I love that. That's my favorite thing to do. It's my favorite class to teach. I personally, if I have bees, I don't want to buy bees. I like to take the bees I have and split them out around tax day, the 1st of April, just to give you a clue. But you have to have all of your equipment bought, painted, and ready to go. So be thinking about, do you need to buy bees? Do you need to buy equipment? Winter is the time where you clean up your equipment and you work on getting your new equipment ready. You paint and everything else, if that's what you choose to do. This is an old, we used to buy from Treva. I like her. Her bees are okay. They're not the best. The bees you got this year were superior. I'm sure you'll hear more information of getting in on some of the TVBA orders, but get your orders in early. meaning no later than Christmas. I start making phone calls in November and December, and I get locked in. If you wait till spring, it's too late. So go ahead and get your bees ordered, get your equipment order. If your hive makes it through the winter, y'all, you're going to have to build up super fast. You'll learn how to do that. And I've already told you your queen starts around Valentine's Day, and then you have to look at 3-week cycles of when the female brood is coming out, and by the 1st of April, they will be swarming. Even though swarms can start as early, super early, depend on your genetics. Derek Forster is a local distributor for our stuff. That wraps it up.
Hey, Stewart, this is Billy and Lacey over here.
Yay.
Hey, thanks again for doing this. One of the main questions that I'm still kind of working up to is how much honey to save? How much resources do I need? I have, multiple hives here, and it doesn't seem like I'll end up with enough honey to make sure that all of the supers are completely full with honey.
Yep.
So, part of it is at this point, it doesn't look like I'm really going to be able to really take much honey, but then also just how to distribute it out. And then dry sugar, obviously the best thing to do. I just want to make sure that, if I don't have enough honey to go around, and I don't want to take any.
Yeah.
But how much is enough? Do the nukes need 5 full frames? Do the 8s need 8 full frames of honey?
It's ideal. They could make it without it, but let me encourage you a little bit, Bill. You've worked hard this year. You've done fantastic. You're not in a place to sell honey, but look, 1 medium frame of honey equals a quart. Mm-hmm. So why don't you take you 2 frames and get you 2 quarts of honey and be proud of it, and let people serve it up and let people eat it on a biscuit and just be happy. You know what I'm saying? You deserve that, and I think that's a good thing to do. So let me go down the action steps just to quickly summarize what I'm asking you to do. So everyone pay attention. This is important. Number 1, inspect right now. Start looking to downsize your hives. You have too much space on there right now. I'm telling you. And you're like, yeah, Stuart, but you don't understand. This hive was a monster hive. No, I totally understand. I'm telling you, it's okay to get that ratio of 80-20. Go ahead and start downsizing them now. If you do that in the spring, you make them swarm, but it does not happen now. They're thinking downsizing. So go ahead, and if they've cleared out that bottom box, and just let you know, sometimes they clear out the top box. That happened to Randy one time. It was weird. I don't care. Even if you need to configure, like if there's 4 empty frames in one and 4 empty frames in another, take the empty frames out and rearrange it in a perfect arrangement. Your beekeepers now, moving things around is what you're supposed to do. So I'm empowering you, move stuff around. That's the way to do it. So number 1, inspect and downsize. Number 2, very critical, check your stores, and you're probably going to need to feed. Y'all, I fed every year of my beekeeping. I've cheated a few years, but this is not a failure. We don't have the fall flows we used to have. So to answer your question, Bill, yes, please. The ideal is to have 8 frames of medium or 5 frames in a nook. Now, could it be a little short? Sure it can. Third thing I want you to do, remember robbing's happening right now, so it's going to be dangerous feeding right now. Make sure that your entrance reducers are in place. And man, there's a possibility we may set off robbing, y'all. It could happen. But number 3, watch October and look for that last cluster of days to where we're going to have temperatures over 70 degrees. And I don't care what's going on. You got to get in there. You got to get in there, clean out the paraphernalia, configure everything perfectly. And I like to not move it around too much then either, because remember, they've propolised everything up. But if I need to, I will get that ideal configuration, favor the west side if you need to, because remember they shift west, and then put your dry feed on top. You could either do that wax paper on top of the frames, or I prefer to put my inner cover open with a feeding shim or a box on top, and I put my 3-part pollen, 7-part sugar mountain camp method. Then number 4, do not get back in that hive. Do not inspect it. Don't break it open. Now, can you look into it? Of course. Remember, I tap on the side of the box. I listen to them. I tilt it. I get a weight test. I see how they're doing. Number 5, you've got to have a strategy. If we have a warm winter, caution. Caution. They will probably not take top feed. However, Ruth Ann's feed box that she showed you, that Kendall build, they may take it out of that because they love it. It encourages feeding. They really, really love it. But in a worst case scenario, I will open feed during a long warm spell. The dry food can help them from starving. Remember, I told you, starving is not one of the main killers. Neither is cold. That's what beginners think is the problem. That's like number 4 or 5 on the kill list. Varroa, viruses, vapor. Condensation is going to kill you. And so will the viruses. So, and in my other class, you're going to learn one of the best times to treat is on the winter solstice, when the brood pattern's the smallest, it's cold, they're all clustered together. If you do some kind of vapor treatment, it really hits them very well. Like if you do an oxalic treatment around that time period, I know many people that do treatments after Christmas, before New Year's Day, and that will set you up for a very successful spring. Inspections rarely start robbing for me, but you got to be clean. Like, don't be dropping honey on the ground or honey on the box or scratching off comb and laying it around. That stuff sets off robbing. But and I didn't state the obvious here, but I'll just say it. Let's say your bottom box is almost empty. I will set it over to the side and I will go frame for frame, and I'll use my brush and I'll gently encourage the bees to go back in the box. So you take all the bees off of it, and remember, I take that box way out of sight, more than 100 yards away, and I let them rob out the nectar. If there's pollen, I'll either freeze it, but I don't like that too much. You can put it on an ant pile and let the ants clear out the pollen. And then you freeze the frames for 24 to 48 hours, and then you store them in a way to prevent wax moth. And you really want to keep that comb. That is going to become very valuable next spring. It'll help you build up a whole lot more efficiently.
And to prevent robbing, when you're working on your hives and you're taking those boxes off till you can get them carried away, cover them up with something. Put a quilt over them, a sheet or a towel or anything, or an extra lid if you have it, but just cover them up.
That's it.
Okay.
That will set off robbing too. Good point. That's the problem.
Okay.
Having stuff sitting out, encouraging them to come at it.
Carry them off that same day. I'm not saying leave them there for 2 or 3 days, but till you can get out of the bee yard with those boxes, cover them up.
Hey, Stewart, how often would you recommend to begin inspections again? More frequently now that, because we've slowed down because of, the summertime and not trying to get in there as much. But going forward.
Right. No, slow up a lot. I would just do this inspection I'm asking you to do now to reduce space and check your food stores and feed. And that was something else I didn't talk about in the October. I watch traffic coming in and out. If you see them slowing up, you want to make sure you're queen right this time of year. And that basically just means you have a good queen, but y'all don't expect her laying big brood patterns. That doesn't mean she's failing. She's slowing down. That's good. That's a good behavior. But in that October inspection, you definitely want to make sure you have a queen in there. That is important. You got to be queen right. And that's where, if you, this is tricky because new people sometimes have trouble finding the queen. Find evidence of the queen at least. But if there's a swarm, you may have to do a newspaper combine. It's hard to buy a queen this time of year. I don't know anybody that's got queens. Ruth Ann, do you know any right now? So to let y'all know, I currently have 5 hives and 3 nooks. So if one of those, if anybody has problems, I'm just going to fix it.
So when should I move those?
Yeah,
start moving the honey around.
I would start to do it now and get them feeding. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. See, that's the balance. Yeah. And by the way, Billy, that's normal. If you have 6 hives, usually 2 are really great, 2 are okay, and 2 are struggling. So you can make decisions of when to supplement the weaker hives. And I think it's an okay time to do it now. And if you see that one hive's pulling more than others, maybe pull some of their frames, let them do the work for everybody else. You can get creative. I don't think you need to be inspecting every week right now. I'm lazy, y'all. I hadn't inspected in a long time, but I need to get in there this weekend myself and do exactly what I've told you. By the way, I'm a hypocrite. Everything I just told you, I fail at. So don't think I'm perfect, and I don't want you to feel like you have to be perfect. When I go in the bee yard, almost 100% of the time I come out and I have this feeling like I just messed up, like I just did something wrong. But the bees really are good at taking care of things. So be courageous, be bold, take chances, and move things around. You got to move things around now. You can't leave it stationary. You got to design it to the best of your ability. If you don't have enough, design it in a way with the resources you have on the westward side of your box.
And if you have some hives, Billy, because you have so many, if you just don't have anything to put in some of them, you might think of combining some of those and give away a queen. There are people who need queens sometimes.
Yeah, you could sell a queen.
Yeah.
You would need to get one of the inspectors to come check it out, okay? You're not supposed to sell bees without inspections.
Well, I'm hoping I don't have to do that. Most of them all seem pretty healthy. There is one that is very weak, just hasn't been laying much really all year. She's still laying, just not actively, not as much. And I'd love for them all to try to take them all, obviously, into the winter.
Then do that, and do it as an experiment, Billy.
Sure.
You could say, like, hey, I think it's weak. I don't know. Let's check her out. Let's see if she works. Let's see how she rebounds next year. And if she doesn't come out strong, I used to say get rid of her, but y'all, I've learned something. I don't have an indoor observation hive yet. When I was a little boy, my parents used to go camping, like trailer camping. And I remember Fall Creek Falls and Harrison Bay and places like that had observation hives. And it mesmerized me as a child. I want one so bad. But our friend Jeff Dayton, who unfortunately didn't get to come talk, but he'll come at some point. But when those slower queens that don't build up as big, they're a perfect candidate for an inside observation hive. You want a slow queen that doesn't build up much. So see, we can even do creative things like that too.
But now would be the time to try to replace her to see if she would overwinter. Is that?
No, I don't.
No,
I didn't understand what you said. I wouldn't replace her.
Okay.
No. You're either going to have to kill her and combine her bees into one of the other hives, or reduce her space, give her some food,
Yep.
and run an experiment and see if she makes it.
Okay.
But next year, though, if she doesn't start out real well, you need to think like, do I want this genetics in my stock? Do I want this drones? Do I want her drones breeding? If she doesn't do real well next spring, you probably definitely want to get rid of her then.
Okay. Thank you.
I think she may surprise you.
Yeah, I'd love to see it next spring.
Thank y'all for being here, though, offering support.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah, thank you.
every time I hear it, it reinforces what I need to hear. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You got it, buddy.
Me too.
All-
Thanks.
All right, y'all. Thank y'all so much.
See ya.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.